So hello, welcome. This is of course Headlocks and Headphones. We did have a little 2 week sabbatical, but you can't blame us. We were every week during lockdown and university starting and family life and everything kicking in. Just having 2 weeks to recharge the batteries has actually been a really good thing for me. And hopefully over the next couple of weeks we have some entertainment coming. Let's just put it that way. Now, over the past couple of days, there has been the announcement that CWF is officially launching. That happened on Twitter the other day. The one thing is, we are normally a Friday show. This week, the show's coming out on Sunday the 4th, which is the same night as NXT TakeOver. We are going to do some NXT discussions later on as well, but we're not going to catch up on the shows that we've missed largely. We are, however, going to catch up on a little bit of the stuff that happened on SmackDown. So there's a few interesting things that happened there. Raw largely has been pretty bland, and I haven't really been keeping up with the majority of the other wrestling shows. I've taken a couple of weeks to actually just sit back and relax from wrestling. And you know what? It's felt great, but it feels really good to be able to be in a position where I'm sitting and getting to enjoy wrestling again. But this is Headlocks and Headphones, and let's get to the wrestling news. Okay, so normally what we do is we do the wrestling news, show reviews, and then we talk about some of the other things that we want to talk about that week. But this week, I'm going to kind of wrap in the Raw and SmackDown into the wrestling news because, to be honest, I have watched Raw every week. It's 3 hours you can put on and just kind of get on with other stuff. So it's a really good way to actually catch up on some uni work. However, when it comes to SmackDown, I've kind of dipped in and out, but I'm going to talk about some of the exciting things that are happening in wrestling right now. The last pay-per-view for me was very, very good. One of the things that made me quite happy was to see one of the Usos getting a chance to actually shine. However, in the SmackDown that took place on Friday, we did see an altercation between Kevin Owens and The Fiend on the KO show that was guesting on SmackDown, and it looks like Kevin Owens is inviting The Fiend or Bray Wyatt, depending on which perspective you have, to Raw on Monday night. So that should be interesting. They also plan a 6-man tag match on Raw, which will also include Drew McIntyre and Randy Orton. So that should be quite interesting. The ending of Raw was pretty good fun. I think it's quite clear now. They're trying to find ways to avoid letting Ric Flair get hurt. So they had him sitting in the ambulance and driving away rather than doing any moves. They had the lights go out with the segment that ended Raw. For anybody who hasn't seen it, Randy Orton, dressed as a cleaner wearing a mask, was heading towards the room where the legends who cost Randy Orton the title were playing poker, and he was wearing night vision goggles. He went into the room, turned off the light, and we heard everybody getting beat up. Lights come back on, everybody's all over the floor. Great way to hurt Ric Flair without taking the gamble. I'm very much impressed by the stuff that's going on in certain aspects of Raw. The thing that kind of upset me a little bit, Angel Garza's injured. Untold time that he could be taken off. They did end up having to stop a pay-per-view match with that. So hopefully it's not going to be as serious as it first looked. But there are some positives this week if we ignore the injury. Sami Zayn retained the IC title against Jeff Hardy. I hate using the phrase IC title. It's the Intercontinental title. But I'm a big fan of Sami Zayn, and I think getting a win over Jeff Hardy does not hurt him at all. And also at this stage of his career, Jeff Hardy losing to Sami Zayn is not a bad thing. Now, I did see there's a story this week that Sami Zayn kind of addressed the bad attitude that he has, or at least the perception of that. So it's quite interesting to see Sami still getting booked, still getting used. That bad attitude, sometimes it's not a bad attitude. Sometimes you just don't know how the system requires you to speak. And I know some people, Jim Cornette especially, have had problems with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn and their attitude towards things. So it'll be quite interesting to see exactly what happens in the coming months. Of course, next Friday is the draft on SmackDown, so that should be quite interesting. Untold things could happen during the draft. I certainly think that for next week's show, we're going to do a draft pick special, and we're going to try and get as many people as I can from the circle of friends to make their picks for who gets drafted. But on that note, on SmackDown, we did see Otis defeat John Morrison, and he will represent himself in court next week against The Miz. This is one of the cheesier things that happen on SmackDown, but hopefully we can get an end to that entire storyline. Maybe get that bloody briefcase off of Otis. I mean, I know a lot of people like him, but I just don't get it. It's stupid. It makes no sense. But this is another thing. Some people like it, some people don't. I certainly fit in the don't like it category. One thing I did like was The Fiend and Alexa Bliss and the way that they kind of reached out and held hands. There's a lot to come from that. I think it's going to be a great storyline. I'm fascinated to see where it's going to go. Now, on top of that, we saw the reveal of the mystery woman from SmackDown, which was Carmella. It was spoiled a few weeks ago because they put the tattoo in there and didn't cut it out. However, she appears to have a new attitude. Whether that's going to lead to much success or not, I don't know. They kept repackaging Emmalina several years ago, and it did nothing for her. So hopefully that does something for her. Now, we did also find out that Jey Uso gets another shot against Roman Reigns. Do you know what? I really like this. The fact that they crowned him tribal chief on SmackDown, and what they did was they had him basically say, "I didn't enjoy what I did to you at the pay-per-view, Jey." Almost like Jey kind of gave him no choice. There's so much good storytelling happening right now on SmackDown that's perhaps fallen under the radar because people just have this hard on for anything WWE, which is a crying shame. The vast majority of what WWE are doing is great in small doses. Certainly don't want to be watching 3 hours of Monday Night Raw. Now, one of the things we should mention is this year they were meant to do WrestleMania, and it was meant to be at a big sports stadium in Tampa. It was meant to be Hollywood next year. It looks like they may try and do Tampa next year. Maybe Hollywood will be the year after. So they are trying to kind of reward the people who have stuck by them at least somewhat. Florida has been a very good partner for WWE in recent months, especially considering they allowed them to film at the Performance Center when other places were not allowed to film. So WWE will be wanting to give something back, no doubt, to Florida and its fans there. Now we move on. The one thing I think we kind of briefly touched on this on the last show before we took our little sabbatical, WWE taking control of talent's Twitch accounts and the revenue from it. I've had this argument as somebody who's trained in radio. I honestly think there's no issue with people having outside ventures. I think it should stop the second that somebody uses their own name. If Paige was using Paige as her Twitch account, then yeah, there's an issue. If AJ Styles is using AJ Styles, then yeah, there's an issue. But if they use their real names, Alan Jones, it shouldn't be an issue. Vince could find quite a lot coming from this. There is apparently a few state governors and a few politicians who are heavily involved in trying to push to eliminate the independent contractor status that WWE used to avoid paying certain things out. But what people have to realize is WWE do spend a lot of money giving platforms. They do have a lot of partnerships. And one of the things that allegedly led to this, and some people have disagreed, but was a sponsorship deal that Lana had for an energy drink, which directly conflicts with the sponsorship deal WWE have with a major drinks company. So obviously WWE will be looking to protect that. So there is a logical stance WWE can take. I think what they've done is went way past that logical stance, unfortunately. So hopefully WWE will see sense and we'll get something happening, because the way it's been worded and the way that people are reacting seem a little different. Yeah, they're looking to take control of revenue and stuff like that. However, there is also the fact that they're stating that they will take control of channels that aren't authorized. So that seems to suggest up, down, and several other avenues that people are using that are already in existence will continue. So hopefully we can get this cleared up in the coming weeks. Now, we did talk about an injury, and I know this seems like I'm going to end on an injury, so I will try and not end on an injury. But Tegan Knox has suffered a torn ACL again, and it looks like she's going to be out for quite a long time. She seems snake bit, which is a shame. She's a great worker. She looks great. She's somebody who the fans loved when they were allowed in to see. So there's something bad there for her. I think she's having too many injuries, which is a crying shame. Now let's move on, hopefully, to something a little positive before we get to our last story, and that is, how many viewers does Impact Wrestling average each week? Now, according to WrestleNomics, Impact Wrestling averaged 151,000 viewers on AXS TV, which, AXS TV is quite a small station, and considering it's being produced in Canada with a very small budget, the worrying thing is that's a much lower number than they would hope for if they were in the Dixie Carter era. I think just now they're very much in a rebuilding era. I think the people who are in charge would be very happy with that number. However, you'd be hoping that in the coming months there will be some great improvements for Impact Wrestling. Certainly, they're looking to sign a lot of new talents. They're certainly looking to bring in people who are going to get some eyes on them. And there is a lot of people interested in their product. However, on saying that, one of the things that's quite interesting in our little sabbatical is Ring of Honor, out of nowhere, have become the most intriguing product in wrestling. And I'm a big fan of the old style Ring of Honor, the one with the shaking hands and the Code of Honor and the 60-minute Iron Man match between CM Punk and various wrestlers over the years. The problem was Ring of Honor became very much a watered down version of itself. When you look at it now, they've actually decided to go towards actually building some wrestlers, putting on some good wrestling for the pure title tournament. And I'm a big fan of what they've done. I haven't seen everything they've done. I've just seen clips. I like the changes that they've made. I think if this just happens to be because of lockdown and it's facilitated by, it's a need to fill the space, then fine. But hopefully it's something they can continue with. Now, one of the things that we obviously spoke about was a Thunderdome, and as a WWE fan, I'm kind of okay with it. I know a couple of people that have been on the Thunderdome screens. They've been really happy with it. They weren't on the whole show. They were on for 5-10 minutes, and then they got bumped and somebody else went on. But they also happened to be quite clever and didn't do anything stupid like put the Ku Klux Klan up or anything stupid like that. But it is quite interesting. WWE have actually changed the Performance Center around. They've apparently went in and tore it all up, and we now have something completely different. It's called the Capitol Wrestling Center, which is a nod to Vince's grandfather and Capitol Wrestling, which obviously is where it all began. And what's quite interesting here is they are saying that tonight's NXT TakeOver is going to have the Thunderdome set, or at least a version of it, but it's also going to have around about 100 fans. So we should have a little bit more of an atmosphere compared to what we've had recently. We have to see this as a test run. WWE are doing this to test things out in a small number on an NXT show. And that brings us to the end of the wrestling news. I'm super excited about how this set's going to look. They're saying it's going to revolutionize things. It never does, let's be fair. But for me, it'll be quite interesting to see where it goes. WWE are, for me right now, the company that I do watch every week. However, they're not the company providing the best product. For me, I think Ring of Honor are doing that. So NXT TakeOver 31 is the chance for the WWE to put on a show that's going to show everybody they're still capable of putting out a good show. And let's go to Martin's Opinion Corner and break down the show. Before we go on, one thing that I haven't really mentioned, but certainly I don't feel it should be passing without mention, is the death of Joe Laurinaitis. He died at 60, apparently had some underlying medical conditions. If you don't know who that is, it's Animal from the Legion of Doom. I just want to say, massive fan of the Legion of Doom. Just last year, bought wrestling masks, the Zubaz-style wrestling masks of the Legion of Doom. I'm a massive fan, and I've even inquired about getting somebody to make my own version of the LOD spikes. I've had videos recorded by Animal to wish celebrations with my wife. So it was one of those, it was like, oh, that kind of sucks. He's one of the guys who's been really outspoken about wrestling in recent years, but at the same time has still clearly retained his passion for the business. If you haven't seen much of LOD, go to the network or go to YouTube and look at some of the matches they had, particularly the AWA and the NWA, when they were just monsters. They were so green. They were being guided by the other guys, but they were just so strong. By the time they got to WWF in 92 or 91, they were just different. They weren't quite as big. They weren't quite as powerful. So it's quite interesting to see what's going to happen with the future of wrestling, because at one point his son was going to be in wrestling, and we look at, I think it's the rose tinted glasses for us old fans. I'm 36, but we're old. It's the rose-tinted glasses for us old fans, but they don't make them like they used to. And when you look at the Legion of Doom, they tried to do it again with Heidenreich, and it didn't work. The dynamic wasn't the same. So it's somebody who was sorely missed when he decided not to wrestle anymore. But Road Warrior Animal gone at 60. Hopefully, we don't get too many more deaths in the coming months. So NXT TakeOver, we're going to do this match by match. It seems the easiest way. Kushida versus Velveteen Dream. Based on the allegations against Velveteen Dream, I'm going to have to go with Kushida. I think he is somebody who needs the push, and he dresses like Martin McFly from Back to the Future. NXT Cruiserweight Championship, Santos Escobar versus Isaiah Swerve Scott. I would love Scott to win that, but I think Santos Escobar is being built as something special, so him getting that would be great. Damian Priest versus Johnny Gargano. I have to go with Damian Priest on that one. We'll see how good our predictions are next week. Of course, Io Shirai versus Candice LeRae. Definitely going with Io Shirai. And of course, Finn Balor versus Kyle O'Reilly. Now, do you know what? This one's a bit left field. People don't expect it. But if you go to the WWE Instagram account and see what Kyle O'Reilly's been posting, it is hilarious. The guy is very talented, but he's talented in a way that kind of like Daniel Bryan when he joined the company. I don't think we'll appreciate it until he gets to a certain point. He is capable, he can talk, and he also has the ability to connect with an audience. So I'm a big fan of Kyle O'Reilly. I just don't think he'll get the title tonight. So that's the NXT TakeOver 31 on the 4th of October 2020. Okay, so normally what I do when I do interviews is I record an intro and then I head straight to the interview. But seeing as I've actually managed to finally get you on camera after 5 months of dodging the interview. Now, when we started doing headlocks and headphones, the whole point was get everybody through lockdown, and we were going to get everybody to kind of talk about what they like and what they dislike about wrestling, what brought them to be a wrestling fan. But for some reason, you have been more difficult to get an interview with than I've found it to get an interview with the guy who runs the Scottish Wrestling Hall of Fame. So the thing that's interesting here is, this would be the 6th time we've arranged the interview, and the other 5 times, because of everything that's been going on between you and JJ, they've not went ahead for various reasons. So hopefully this time we can get this one out of the way, because I know this is the first of a 2-part interview. And this week we're going to find out why you're a wrestling fan. And next week we're going to find out the next project that you've got lined up coming up in 2021. So, seeing as I've just spent a couple of minutes burying you a little bit or dodging our interviews, let's give you a chance to properly introduce you, because the people who watch the show, all they've seen is you and JJ talking to each other. So let's step away from that just now and introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the interview.
No problem. So I'm Stuart Murphy. To the viewers, you'll probably recognise me more as Murphy, who Martin and JJ have been talking so much about. I'm a lifelong wrestling fan. I mean, not lifelong, because that would require being a wrestling fan in the womb, but I'm not quite that old yet.
How old are you? How old
am I?
Yeah, I know it's not polite to ask a woman her age, but I thought I'd ask anyway.
Oh, I mean, we all know the women in this conversation, and it's not me. So, I'm 30 years old.
30 years old. Okay, well, it was a tough paper round. So what was your first wrestling memory that you can think of right now?
My first wrestling memory? God, there's so many. My first wrestling memory is probably... There was probably one before this, but the one that comes to mind is the Austin 316 promo.
Okay.
at King of the Ring in '96.
So what stood out for you about that made you want to keep watching? Because my first memory was Ted DiBiase walking down the entranceway at Survivor Series, and just me looking at him and thinking, wow, this is incredible. So what about Stone Cold Steve Austin stood out for you?
It was more the fact that he was rebellious, I think. Like, he was going against the grain. It's not what you would expect from Vince McMahon's WWF at that time. It was more a family-friendly product at that time. So for him to come out and say stuff like that, I think kind of attracted worldwide attention rather than just national. And it was very touching.
Would you say that Stone Cold was your favourite wrestler as a kid?
I wouldn't say he was my favourite wrestler, but he was definitely my favourite entertainer.
So who would you put down as your favourite wrestler? Because this is going to lead me to an interesting question here in a second.
Right, my favourite wrestler.
Just growing up, not just now, because we'll get to that part later.
Growing up, my favourite wrestler was probably either Dean Malenko or Chris Benoit.
Interesting. Both great wrestlers, and we won't censor the second word, even though some companies do. So why would you say that those two were your favourite wrestlers?
Well, see, what Malenko lacked in charisma, I think he more than made up for in the ring. He was definitely, if you ask anyone in the world that's a wrestling fan who your top wrestlers are, Dean Malenko is very high on that list. Everything he did was flawless, I would say. In ring-wise, maybe not on the mic and stuff like that, but in ring-wise, Malenko, everything he did in that ring was flawless. Benoit was the same. Benoit was like the very technical in that ring. You wouldn't get high-flying moves from him, but you would get their nitty-gritty amateur-like wrestling, which kind of encouraged me to watch wrestling a bit, to be perfectly honest with you.
So somebody like a Chris Benoit was one of the inspirations for you, like in wrestling. That's interesting. So at what age did you start to veer more towards the wrestler as opposed to the entertainer? Because it was clear there your passion leans more towards the wrestler than the entertainer.
Well, see, at first, as I say, my earliest memory was the King of the Ring speech from Austin. That got me into the entertainment side of it. And then I was introduced to the Cruiserweight division in WCW at the time. And saw some of the wrestling that was on display in that division. It was absolutely fantastic. Chris Benoit, I think, got me into overall wrestling as a wrestling dynamic. I think for the entertainment front, you're looking more at someone like Jericho.
See, I think Jericho is somebody who doesn't get the credit he deserves for his part in the Cruiserweight division, because everybody always thinks of the Juventudes and people like that, and Dean Malenko as well, and they see them as the guys that are inspirational. Now, at what age did you attend your first wrestling show?
Oh, my first wrestling show. I'm actually ashamed to admit that at the age I attended my first wrestling show, I was 28 years old.
Wow. Okay, so that's interesting. Because most...
I'll even stir the pot a bit more for you and say at 28 years old, I actually attended my first wrestling show with a certain JJ Andrews.
Really? So I'm guessing your first wrestling show would have been a local Glasgow promotion called ICW.
It was, yes.
So, having grown up as a fan of wrestlers like Dean Malenko and entertainers like Stone Cold Steve Austin, where does ICW fit on that radar?
I've got one word for you, and it's Lionheart.
Well, do you know what?
And in fairness to the boy, let's take a moment to remember Lionheart, because he was an incredible individual and also an incredible entertainer and professional wrestler at the same time.
Have I told you my Lionheart story? I know everybody has stories about Lionheart.
You've not actually told me your Lionheart story, no.
Okay, so I was at a wrestling show here in Aberdeen, and Lionheart was in the main event, and at one point, although he was a bad guy, my kids really enjoyed him, so they went over to say hi, and he ignored them and walked past, and my twins broke down crying, and the guy who was promoting the show came over and asked what was up, and said, "Oh, I'll go and have a word with him, don't worry." And then about 2 minutes later, he came over and He couldn't have been nicer. He spent 5 minutes talking with my kids, taking pictures, and he was lovely. And then he turned around and I saw him walking away, and I could see just he didn't ignore my kids. The issue was he was hurt. He was trying to get to the back because I think it was either his neck or his back, but he was in a lot of pain. But he I hate this phrase, but he manned up, he came out and he spent time with my kids. And that's something that, it's such a small thing for in the grand scheme of things, but my kids will probably never forget that. So it's really cool. Now, you seem to kind of cross a lot of gambit, a lot of places here on the product field. So you're a fan of the cruiserweights, you're a fan of the entertainers, you like the ICW product. What product do you watch today?
Today, I'm a wrestling fan. So I will watch, if wrestling is on my TV, I'll watch it. I don't care if it's WWE, AEW, New Japan, ICW. I will watch any wrestling that's on TV because it's at the end of the day, I'm a fan of the sport of wrestling. I'm not a fan of a company.
Well, see, that's great to hear, because although wrestlers, it's nice when they have brand loyalty. Some of the fans that you see online just now, I think, are really harming the product when it comes to their severe loyalty, and it means that they seem almost unwilling to accept the fact that I've recorded something for earlier in the show. I'm a big fan of Roman Reigns and Jey Uso. That whole program is very, very good. I'm intrigued.
The Roman Reigns Jey Uso story I'm a very big fan of. I'm liking the fact they've turned Roman heel. They've gone with the tribal chief kind of angle. And the fact that they've got Jey Uso that at Clash of Champions got absolutely mauled, but he still showed signs of life in him, and that never say die attitude, and that's what I kind of like, that they're building Jey Uso up like that.
There is the opportunity for the rematch at the next special event as well. I still
they have pretty much confirmed it. I mean, Jey Uso got put over by AJ Styles on SmackDown as well. So,
and that for me, it shows that there's people out there that say WWE don't do anything well, and you look at stuff like that and you're like, that whole story is great. It's clear the promo he cut is very entertaining on Friday and very emotional and heartfelt. And then you compare that to the Fiend stuff with Alexa Bliss. There's clearly a lot of story to tell there. And you go over to Raw and obviously the Drew McIntyre stuff I'm a fan of because he's Scottish. But then you look at other promotions, and this is one of the things I want to reiterate on every show we do. I don't dislike any show. I just look at certain products and I can't watch it because I find myself kind of frustrated at how random it seems. That's why I always dish out the AEW duties to the producer Zoe Styles, because she can tell me what's good and then I can go and watch it.
Yeah, I mean, me and you have had this discussion before. Like, I know you're a very big critic of AEW, right? And that's understandable, because without critics, a company can't improve. Everyone has their critics, and everyone needs their critics because then they get better. I myself do watch AEW regularly. There's some things I'm a fan of, and recently, as I've spoke to you about yourself, there's some things I'm not a fan of. There's some things I don't understand, and there's some things that I do understand. And I understand things they're trying to do, but at the same time, I think they may be doing it in the wrong way, but I can see what they're trying to do.
I think that's for me is my biggest issue. Is I am a critic, but I sit and I critique everything. I critique WWE, but I still watch because I enjoy. And for me, like, the best wrestling product I've seen in the past 2 years was the original run of NWA Power. Although if you haven't seen it, the most recent Ring of Honor shows for the pure title, they're probably the best stuff, like content I've seen in a while.
I'll be honest, just before you continue, I'll be honest, the last Ring of Honor show I saw was the Honor Rumble from 2019. It was the last Ring of Honor show I saw, where Great Muta and Jushin Thunder Liger were both in the ring at the same time, and that, to me, as a wrestling fan, that is what makes you pop. It's not your Braun Strowmans or anything like that, but Jushin Liger in the same ring as the Great Muta is what makes you pop.
Well, for me, one of the interesting things about Ring of Honor, they've always seemed to be that company that they bring in that Japanese talent, or they bring in that talent from the UK that would never, WWE or WCW back in the day would never have given these guys the opportunity. So to see them getting a chance is really good. So now you talk about people like Muta and Liger, and obviously Liger is no longer a wrestler, but who do you think the standout talents are on the global stage right now? Seeing as you watch quite a lot, you watch a varied product. Who are the guys that stand out as the top guys?
Standout guys to me at the moment.
And girls, let's be fair. I don't want to be gendered here, just to be clear, because I did
Well,
put guys on my questions.
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be honest with you. I think before I answer the question, guys and girls should be treated equally. So by saying one of the guys, to me, you're including the girls in that as well, and that's 100% accurate.
Whenever I say guys, I have that stance.
Yes. So that's exactly to me. My favourite female wrestler, to answer your question, is probably Jordynne Grace.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yep, I went off Impact for a while. I've recently started watching it again because there's a lot of talented wrestlers I've recently taken to it. Most notably, and I think it's a guy that's underappreciated by a lot of people, not just a certain company, but by a lot of people, and that's EC3. Okay. I think is really underrated. Brian Myers is another one that's very underrated, not just by a certain company, but by a lot of people because of how this company has built him up.
I think certainly the fact that he was on a losing streak, people seem to think he's just a jobber. And the thing is, there's an entertaining guy. I mean, having seen him live, he comes across so much better live than he ever did on TV because he gets to be a little bit more of himself, which is good. Now, who would you say, and this is not one of the questions I had, but I want to ask this, who do you think is the most overrated wrestler in the world right now?
The most overrated wrestler in the world right now?
We're not going to go according to Dave Meltzer, because we all know who Dave Meltzer is.
To me, I think it's very tricky because there's a lot of people that, like, in all the companies that I watch, there's a lot of people I would consider are overrated. I mean, if you were to ask me an easier question than that, like, who do I think is like to me, who do I think is a star in the making kind of thing, I could answer that. But to ask me who I think most overrated is a bit.
Do you know my answer? Now, to be honest, I think a lot of the Japanese workers are massively overrated in terms of their ability to connect with an audience, their ability to tell a story. I think physically, they're among the best workers in the world. So I would argue quite a lot of the Japanese workers. But for me, the most overrated worker is Jon Moxley. And that's not because he's not capable. I think it's because he hasn't shown the potential that he had.
See, having seen Moxley pre-WWE, post-WWE, and current, and like during his run in WWE, I'm inclined to disagree. The answer that I was going to say, and it's interesting that you mentioned Japan, because the answer I was going to say is possibly from what you've seen in AEW is Kenny Omega.
Okay. I mean, that would be a very close call for me as well, yeah.
I mean, if you ask me, he's a very talented guy, very talented. But when you ask me why he's talented, I would say because when he's in that ring with like a Jericho or an Okada, he's made to look like an absolute superstar.
Absolutely. I think this sounds bad. He's not lucky to be in with these people. He's there for a reason, because he could draw money. But he has had very good luck in terms of the people who've been willing to help him. And certainly, if Moxley's my number one most overrated guy right now, Omega would be number two. And I think if you're looking at WWE, you have guys like Strowman and stuff who seem to be loved, but for me, it makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, to his credit, to Omega's credit, as much as I think he's maybe overrated at the moment, one of my most favourite matches in wrestling, and if you've not seen it, I would recommend you go and check it. This is not just to you, Martin, but to your viewers as well. It's a triple threat match, and it is Seth Rollins, Kenny Omega, and Daniel Bryan before they were famous, and it's in Ring of Honor.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel Bryan is bald, believe it or not, but it's under the Bryan Danielson gimmick. It's under the Tyler Black gimmick. It's under Kenny Omega, but it is one of the best triple threat matches I've watched in my life, and I owe that big time. I think not to Kenny Omega, but I think that's down to Rollins and Bryan for that one.
Okay, so let's move on, because obviously one of the things that's quite interesting for me is obviously you're more wrestling orientated. Now, I do want to kind of dig. I don't know how much you want to go into it, because obviously you have told me that one of the people involved is somebody who's not looked at favorably right now. But you have trained as a wrestler. So
I have, yes.
I want to discuss with you, are you willing to talk about where you trained?
I'm not willing to talk about where I've trained, no. It's nothing against the guys and girls I trained with. It's just the person that trained me has not come out in good light in the summer of this year, and I would rather not announce where I trained.
So
I have my own stories in regards to this, but I not want to come public. It's not something that's happened to me. It's something that I've witnessed, so it's not my place to say.
do you have any fun stories from when you were training? So rather than go down the deeply depressing route of the speaking out movement, do you have any fun stories of anything that happened to you at training?
Fun stories. I mean, that depends on your definition of fun.
Did you get beat? Did you get chopped 100 times? Did you get chopped?
I've been thrown off everything imaginable. I think the most fun moment for me, and you'll probably ask me why this is fun, because for most people this would be like the worst moment of their life. But the most fun moment for me was I went top rope and got pushed off. Not only have I went through a table, but I managed to smack my ankle off of a metal ring barrier as well. So
fun times. You know what? I did some wrestling training back in the day, and apart from one time where I blew basically two muscles in my leg out at the same time, even though some of it was physically intense, it was great fun. Now, this is a bit where it seems kind of personal, but why didn't you stick with the training? If you're a big fan, why didn't you stick with it? Was there something that stopped you?
There was something that stopped me, yes, but as I said, it's not my place to say. It's stuff that I've witnessed, but
you stepped away because you couldn't condone the stuff that you saw.
Exactly.
Well, that's an 100% interesting thing to hear. Now, moving on to the next part, you didn't abandon wrestling entirely. You actually went into backyard wrestling.
So I did, yes.
What drove you to backyard wrestling? Was it just this desire to still continue wrestling?
It was, but it was. There was a couple of things involved in that. It was a desire to continue wrestling, yes. It was also to do with the fact that I've a long time ago of me and an ex-partner who's sadly, and we at that time didn't have enough money to go and do an actual proper training school. Started up like a wee backyard thing, as normal like teenage kids will do that are wrestling fans. They'll do the backyard stuff. I was kind of turned out to be a wee bit successful. And then I took a few years out, which, if you don't mind, I don't want to discuss on camera.
Yeah.
I was away from the wrestling scene for 10 years for personal issues, which me and you have discussed privately.
Yeah.
And when I came back, I thought if I do that, when there, I can get myself re-familiarised with it while I'm training.
Almost testing your passion to see if you wanted to do something else.
Yes.
Okay, so that's interesting. Now, you did mention a couple of weeks ago that you just had your last backyard match. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So, everybody assumes backyard wrestling is all about just hitting each other with whatever's in somebody's back garden, and it's just lots of violence and lots of blood and whatever. So let's talk. Like, who was your last match against?
My last match was against actually someone that I have told him I was doing this interview, and he has chosen that he wants to remain anonymous. But let's just say we were very close. He was almost like a brother to me, and he was handpicked by myself. I wanted him to be my last match, but the condition I had was that he was to obviously go over me rather than the other way around.
How
But
did
just
the
to,
match go? Did the match go well?
it went very well. Yes, we've got good chemistry together. We got on well with each other, and to be honest, I've never had a smoother match in a backyard company in my life than that one. And to your point, before we go any further with the interview, to your point, for people that say backyard is all about blood, guts, all of this hitting people, whatever you can find, I can honestly say, having done it, that is not 100% true. There is an element of backyard. Yes, backyarders can be untrained at times, but everyone that I worked with had went through some form of training, whether it be amateur training or professional training, through some kind of wrestling training. I personally wouldn't trust getting in the ring with someone that didn't know how to properly body slam someone,
So
and that's just a personal preference.
this is what's interesting. So why stop? Why did you have your last backyard? And is this you're not doing a Terry Funk and you're going to do a farewell backyard match in a year? You've already told me privately that that's it. You don't want to do it anymore. Your heart's not in backyard wrestling. So why is that? Why are you no longer interested?
I think it's because there's another thing that I'm doing at the moment, which we'll talk about in the next part of this interview, because I know this is a two-part one, as we've already spoke about. So in part two, we'll speak about the future. To be honest, it was taking a toll on my body. I could go into a match and I could have fun during the match because adrenaline, and then for a couple of days afterwards, I could be hurting very severely.
So how hardcore are your matches? I mean, are you using fire, thumbtacks, anything like that?
No, thumbtacks, yes. Fire, no. I did use fire once. I have a secret on the fire thing, but I won't spoil anything for wrestling fans who think it's legitimate fire. I won't spoil anything.
Okay.
But although I probably have by saying that, but you know, each to their own.
Now somebody's going to try and Google it just to see what they can find.
But no, I've done fire once. I've had thumbtacks. I've had cinder blocks. It's although backyard isn't 100% hardcore style wrestling, when it gets hardcore, it gets very real hardcore. And it was taking a big toll on my body, and I thought, I don't want to risk being paralysed before I'm 40, so to say.
Well, do you know what? I'm 36 and I haven't taken a wrestling bump in 10 years.
Yeah.
But the last batch of bumps I took were on concrete, and I can assure you, I don't want to take them anymore. It's not something that interests me. And when people talk about the fact that, you know, taking bumps, it can be fun. I mean, it can be fun when you've had some beer and stuff. And I'm sure with an audience there, it would be a lot of fun. But doing it when you're half cut with your friends, it's, you know, the novelty wears off a little bit. After a little while, the novelty wears off.
It definitely does, yeah. And I will say, concrete isn't, having took it myself, similar to yourself, concrete's not fun to land on. People don't, I wouldn't recommend doing it at home at all.
Okay, so thank you for joining me for part one. We finally got the introduction to Stuart Murphy out of the way. Next week, you are going to properly talk about your new project. Now, I did briefly mention it earlier in this week's show, and that is the fact that you are launching your own company. But we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to make people wait and talk about it next week.
I'm fine with that, yeah. 100%, but definitely tune in next week, guys, because there's a lot of big stuff you'll want to hear on that show.
Okay, so here it is. He who shall not be named is making a video. Now, Murphy, you're calling me a criminal because I took your keys and I made a copy. I didn't take them, I found them, man. You know, it's what friends were supposed to do. They got returned to you, didn't they? And the reason I made a copy is because if you did lose them again, then you'd have a spare. So, I'd say that was using my head, really, right? Yeah. Friendship's a wonderful thing, isn't it? The fact that you and I were friends, Murphy, good few years ago, it's kind of disgusts me that it's come to this. You know, we were talking what ifs, what if this, what if that, what if we started a promotion together? That'd be cool. That'd be cool. And then you decide to start it. Fantastic, great. Let's hope it hits heights that that have never been hit before. Genuinely, I really hope it does. Yeah. But hey, friendships go out the window for business, don't it? Now, going back to me being a criminal. If I'm a criminal for going out for my daily exercises during lockdown, then hey, lock me up. But the fact you responded with taping your hands up in a threatening manner, that makes me a criminal? No. You know I'm more than up for a fight. And I really don't care where it is. I don't care when it is. Yeah. And it just seems like you've been hiding. But now you've released one video. It just seems like they just keep coming. And you're going on about hiding. No one will be able to. No one will have to hide and step back from other promotions. No one will need to be scared for working for this promotion. See, I reckon you'll be the boss that everyone hates, everyone despises, because you want too much of that. It might be a safe place. It might be a safe place to work. But who's going to want to work for a dickhead boss like you? You come across all aggressive. And you're saying all this about promotions, no one having to back down from anyone. No one needing to back down from anyone. But why was November show last year cancelled? Oh yeah, because someone came and threatened you. And yet you've done nothing about that, because that is criminal behaviour. Oh, back to that. But hey, I'm knocking on doors. I'm knocking on doors that I maybe shouldn't want to. You should know by now, Murphy. You should know by now that I will go head first into anything. This I do not care about. Because, I'll be honest, are you ready for the anarchy?